YouTube. Good. Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Hope your week has started wonderfully. It feels like just yesterday I was doing one of these, so I've got a slightly different set of things to talk about today, taking a little bit of a different direction, going much more practitioner-centric than I have been in recent weeks. But for those of you joining for the first time, my name is Will Critchlow. I'm founder and CEO at SearchPilot. And what we do at SearchPilot is that we run a SEO testing platform which helps very large websites run an experimentation program that includes SEO. So measuring the results of your SEO activities as well as tying them to real business outcomes. So we run what we call full funnel tests, which combine SEO testing with conversion rate testing, so you can see the actual business impact of those changes that you're making. If you're interested in learning more about SearchPilot and how it works, you can head to searchpilot.com/live, where there is a range of resources that'll be useful to you. So some customer stories of some results that we've got, test results of individual lessons that you can learn from specific tests that we've run, as well as information about how this kind of SEO testing works and kind of technical resources and so forth. And if you want to get more, you can fill out the form on that page at searchpilot.com/live, which will to make a request to see a demo, see the actual thing in action. If you're interested in these live streams, I typically do them on Tuesdays at this kind of time. So this is 4:15 p.m. UK time, 11:15 a.m. on the East Coast, 8:15 a.m. on the West Coast. And they might be a little bit sporadic over the summer, but we'll do our best. And I cover quite a wide range of topics, ranging from technical SEO, hardcore geek out stuff, to a lot of leadership type things, how senior managers, people responsible for P&Ls and budgets and forecasts and targets should think about SEO. And that's really focusing on those heads of e-commerce, VP, SVP, EVP type roles that need to oversee the SEO channel. And that is something that I've been kind of fascinated about for as long as I can remember in my professional career, starting out in the consulting side and then more recently building out this kind of testing-led approach to SEO. And what we've realized is that the reason we're building a testing capability is things I want to talk about today in terms of the way Google has been changing, the difficulty of doing on-site SEO in a world of machine learning, artificial intelligence, Google's algorithm becoming increasingly more opaque and harder to understand, as well as some measurement challenges. And I wouldn't, these days, having spent a career in SEO, I wouldn't want to be working with these large websites that are critically dependent on their organic search channel for their revenue and their business performance. I wouldn't want to be working on those without the capabilities of something like SearchPilot. And obviously, you can do this in other ways, but we're trying to solve this problem specifically for those very large e-commerce, retail, travel, jobs, real estate, listings, those kind of websites that are really at scale and where this is a business critical problem for them. And what we've kind of realized is that we're delivering different things to different bits of this organization. So typically the person who signs off on bringing in SearchPilot very much cares about a business outcome. So we're hearing things like, we've got a gap between our target and our forecast. In other words, we're forecasting that we're going to come in below where we want to be. How can we close that gap? How can we do things to do better? Or things are going great, but we want to do even better. Or occasionally, we've made missteps in the recent past, and that's been very expensive. We want to avoid making those kind of missteps again. And in all of these situations, it's the business outcomes that are driving that. But then what we sell to the SEO team is a little different. It tends to be learnings based. So you get to run all these experiments, you get to discover what works, you get to get credit for your work, you get to have some accountability around it, sure, but have some metrics that you can actually influence. And that is the thing that I've really been focusing on most recently, is this idea of, suppose you were given more budget, or the organization, your boss said, we want to go faster, what would it take? Having a good answer to that question is historically quite hard in the kind of on-site and technical end of SEO. You can just do the work faster, I suppose, but that's a fairly unsatisfying answer, especially when the business then follows up with, well, what's the benefit of that going to be? What's the incremental improvement that we would expect? And if you're talking about content production or you're talking about digital PR or these kinds of things, it's fairly easy to understand how more activity results in more outcomes, though they have measurement challenges of their own, particularly digital PR side. But when we're talking kind of on-site and technical, which is a huge part of large product-led websites, if you're talking some of our customers like Skyscanner, Marks and Spencer's, Petco, these huge websites, what they do on their website is the most critical thing in their performance. And building something that works for those users, those searchers, is critical. And having a good answer to, okay, here's more budget, go faster, is historically quite tricky, is what I'm hearing from those teams. And that's what we basically offer, because then once we're up and running with an experimentation program, that means that more budget can mean more tests, can mean working to improve that win rate. And so you get those kind of core KPIs of an experimentation program around number of tests and win rate, which essentially leads to winning tests. And that is the result that you're looking to do. And that's how you outstrip your competitors and other folks in the market, or who are ranking for the kind of queries that you want to dominate. But so what I wanted to talk about today was that side of things. You're actually in the SEO team, you're a practitioner doing some of the work, and what you want to do is build the case for this being the future, that you need to build this kind of experimentation capability so that you can, money in, money out, have a more productive channel, a channel that behaves more like a media channel. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen. Is start with a blast from the past. So not only is this an old headshot, but this is an old post, October 2016. I imagine a lot of folks listening in the SEO space may not have even been in the SEO space in October 2016. But I mean, this was quite a long way into my career, actually. I started over 10 years earlier. But this was an article written on the Moz blog. And I positioned this at this point. This was the write-up of the whole experiment. But this was, turns out, most SEOs are no better than a coin flip at predicting which page will rank better. And this was writing up the results. Obviously, there'd been earlier stages where we'd asked people to take this quiz, do this test, run this survey. And so what this was answering this fundamental question. We want to be able to answer questions about why one page outranks another, and in particular, what the page that is ranking less well, or the website, we're going to talk in page terms, but what that website owner or webmaster would have to do better. That's at its heart the critical question here. Obviously, it scales up to thousands, hundreds of thousands of pages, millions of keywords, and almost unimaginable scale when you're talking about a whole website, and you're certainly talking about some of the sizes of website that I was talking about earlier. But this is what it kind of boils down to. And the question is, can we answer this question for a single page query website? Can we scale that answer to say at larger scale, what would have to be true? What would we have to do as an organization, as a website product owner, to outperform where we currently are? So this is why I think this is at the heart of the question. And so I framed this very much in terms of looking at pairs of websites, pairs of results for specific queries. And I found it quite interesting testing my own thinking on this, because as I put this together, I was a consultant, obviously, back then. This was before, very early days of SearchPilot becoming an idea of something we could do. But before it was an existing product, before it was a business unit, and subsequently its own company. So we're a consultant. I was a consultant, and I actually spent a lot of time trying to encourage our clients and our team not to focus just on individual rankings and individual search terms, because they often lead to blind spots or lead to dead ends, and they don't take you strategically to where you need to go, which is satisfying searcher intent for a broader range of intents, queries, and user journeys. But it's still kind of the core skill, because if we can't answer the question, why does page A outrank page B, then we can't figure out, well, what does page B have to do better, and take that to its obvious conclusion. And if we can't, given a pair of pages and a query, if we can't say which of page A and page B does rank better than the other, then we can't answer any of these questions, because we're just guessing. And if it shows that at scale we can't answer this question, then we can't be confident in our recommendations either. And this was the journey that led to testing. So let me take you a little bit on this journey. We asked a lot of people back in 2016 to take a series of search queries. I think there were 12, and we asked them to, without performing the query, we asked them to look at 2 pages that we told them both these pages rank on the first page of search results for this given query. There was a UK version and a US version. And we asked them to just say, of these 2 pages, which one do you think ranks better for this query? So there were examples like proper kettlebell technique, can't be going with an S. Kettlebell technique was one. How to update OS X, mortgage calculators. These are a range of local, commercial, informational, all kinds of different queries at different stages, different kinds of user journeys, and a wide range of kinds of site that ranked for these kinds of things. And, well, you can see on average, although there were a handful of these keywords that folks were better than a coin flip at, so coin flip is the red line, there were many where the human response was significantly worse than that, and the average overall was actually worse. It was 46% across all responses on the UK accuracy. And there's a lot more background here, but we did segment this data by both experience and region, and it turned out that my guess is actually that the US data was easier, rather than it looks like there are a couple of no-brainer results in the US. 80+% got the mortgage calculator one correct, for example, whereas the UK was much more similar across the board. But anyway, the interesting point was even very experienced SEOs were only just about as good as a coin flip in the UK, and were significantly worse with less experience. And it's funny looking back on it now to be talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is one of those, there's some kind of paradox going on with the Dunning-Kruger effect, because apparently it hasn't replicated. And so it's one of those examples of the crisis in social sciences, where so many of these results that have made their way into popular science books and consciousness turn out not to replicate. The irony being, you can talk very confidently about the existence of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which feels like it's an example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, but only if the Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't exist. And I can get myself tangled up in logical knots for a surprisingly long time thinking about it. So we're going to move past that for a second. But the key part was that people who were sure or fairly sure they got the answer right were almost as bad as people who said they just guessed. And it was only people who said they were unsure who actually did significantly better at that. This is still, I find, quite an interesting article to go back and read. It's a bit of a snapshot of a moment in time. And if you're interested, it's quite easy to find. I always tweet out and add to the LinkedIn comment section the links for the things that I've talked about in these live streams. So I'll be adding those later today or tomorrow. But this was the background. This is, obviously almost 8 years ago. And it was right at that genesis, right at that moment of realizing that the future had to include something like SearchPilot. And partly this was research that reinforced the suspicion and the expectation that we had that this would be a very hard task. And I think we had that expectation at the outset, but it certainly turned out to be the case in that work that we did. And so what we're doing now is we're running a new version of this, asking this time, because AI, obviously, can you beat AI at predicting the SEO outcomes? And so the premise is very simple. Again, given two results and a keyword, you just have to pick which one does better. You can go through it. Something I should have said in the previous explanation was it wasn't just a case of looking at these two pages and saying which one you think should do better. We were explicitly allowing folks to use data, tools, and really any technique at their disposal except performing the actual query on a search engine, because that's just looking up the answer. So don't turn to the back of the textbook, but anything else was fair game. This was a calculators allowed exam. So you're allowed to use your tools. You're allowed to look up the backlinks to the pages. You're allowed to look at their, site speed scores, whatever else you think you might find useful. And you're allowed to look at the HTML, run tools over these things, even crawl the websites if you want to. You can do basically anything except look up the actual answer. And so to make it fair, we gave some of that data to the AI chatbot, if I remember correctly, but we certainly said you can continue to, we didn't give it all the data. I can talk more about another day about what we gave and what we didn't. But the point being, this is a test not only against the coin flip like before, but of course now against AI. And we talked more about the methodology, the data that we collected when we looked up the answers, excuse me, all of these kind of things. And we shared all of this information with the person taking the quiz. We did not give those to Gemini. We just gave Gemini a detailed prompt. So Gemini can use anything it knows about these websites, obviously, but didn't get access to the Ahrefs data, the site speed data, those kinds of things. And it's quite early on. I don't want to give away where we're getting to, or in fact, Gemini's performance on this. I'll give that for another day. But what I did want to talk about was why we felt like it was important to rerun this this survey, this test, this quiz. And that's kind of twofold, I think, really. One from the market and one from our experience. So the changes that we've been seeing in the wider market are just this, I mentioned earlier, this move towards less explainability of Google results. I think it's fairly widely acknowledged at this point that it's probably even harder. It's probably harder, rather, even for Google engineers, folks with access to the systems and the actual data that they're working off. It's harder for them to explain or even possibly find out why one page is outranking another for a specific query. And that's both operational, so these things are coming from all these different places. We saw about the twiddlers and all this stuff in the leaked API docs, as well as that the methodology has been moving. So it sounds a lot as though the older guard of the search quality and search engineering team, folks like Amit Singhal, were not fans of machine learning in the core ranking algorithm, directly evaluating websites and their backlinks and all these other things, and directly driving the actual rankings. They were certainly allowed machine learned scores, so we saw elements of that with Panda and Penguin and various other places, but it's really the second half of the last decade that we started to see machine learning being used in anger in the core ranking experience. And that has many benefits, not least that it allows you to align things more closely with searcher experience and expectations. But one of the downsides is you lose the ability to introspect into those results and ask, why is this happening? And it's super non-linear, super high dimensional. It's not easy to just change the thing that's holding you back in the way that it might have been possible to do 20 years ago, say. So we have this kind of suspicion that this problem has got harder, as well as which we have a lot more of our own experience these days in understanding just how hard it is to come up with winning test ideas and winning hypotheses. And this is a core part of our day job, and I've talked on previous streams about the work that we've done to drive our win rate up, drive our test cadence up. And as I said, these are key performance indicators for individual experimentation programs, but they're of course key performance indicators for SearchPilot as a whole and for our individual customers' success. So it's our customer success team places a lot of emphasis on test cadence and test win rate. And we know how hard that is. And we've pushed that win rate up into the 20+% range. But that's hard. And as far as I can tell, good as well. When we benchmark against other kinds of online experimentation programs, whether it's conversion rate optimization, user experience testing, those kinds of things, win rates in the 10 to 20% range are common, expected, and sufficient to have a business case, an ROI on the testing program as a whole. Those relatively rare, relatively large wins, and that's what digital wins tend to be, it turns out, is that they're sparse and hard to find, but they're valuable when you do find them. Those wins pay for the program. And the fact that they're hard to find, and we've found that to be consistently true over time, even as we've gathered more data, got more experience, run more tests, have our database of previous tests, the fact that that remains true suggests that this problem is perhaps getting harder. It's certainly not getting any easier, and the future trajectory looks like it'll go even further in that direction. So I'm going to share this link as well. This one you can actually take right now. So you can fill in the bits of information we need. In particular, the SEO experience lets us segment these answers like I showed for the previous data. We won't publish individual people's answers without their permission, but what we will of course do is aggregate this data up and find some insights and share those back out with you as well. So if you want to test your SEO skills and you want to help us find out whether this task has got harder and to kind of somewhat benchmark what Google has been going at and the way that they've been changing things in recent years, then please do take this survey. As I say, I'm going to share the link on Twitter and LinkedIn, but it's searchpilot.scoreapp.com. Okay, so I'll share that. You're all going to take it, and we'll talk about the results in a future week when we've had a chance to analyze that data and gather it fully from all the different places. A couple of other things I want to just talk about briefly this week. One is this interesting article from Dana, who has written a whole deep dive. You can see the size of the scroll bar here. A whole deep dive into ways that analytics data can be wrong or misleading. And the summary, combination of ad blockers, cookie consent, browser privacy features, and of course things that have always been true around multiple devices or other kind of issues. And I think the transition from Universal Analytics GA3, as it was known, to GA4 has slightly taken some folks' eye off the ball here, and we haven't realized in many cases there hasn't been enough dialogue around the dramatic drop in analytics quality and coverage that has been seen over recent years. And it's quite hard to benchmark. And I have my suspicions that in some cases, some of the drops which have been caused by growth in ad blockers, growth in cookie consent tracking, those kinds of things, growth in browser privacy features, some of the drops in analytics are caused by the growth in those things. And that there are some organizations that are sitting thinking their SEO team is underperforming when in fact, what they're seeing is a rise in dark traffic, a rise in untracked visitors, a rise in visitors who've opted out in one way or another, whether through technological means like an ad blocker or consent means, depending on where you are in the world in your jurisdiction and what functionality is available to the website. And so we have been thinking about this from a few directions. I mean, one of the big things for us is that we care much more about directionality of traffic than absolute levels. So we actually can work off a sampled subset, but there are certainly challenges with the fact that it's not a uniform sample, it's not a random sample. We've been experimenting with click data from Search Console as an alternative where that is not susceptible to the same kinds of issues, much more inherent to the product And Google is collecting a lot of that stuff on implied consent because it's non-user identifiable. And I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like there's a lot more kind of log file analysis level aggregated data rather than necessarily click level attributed data, which steps around some of the privacy concerns. And remember all the way back to the introduction of, or rather the removal of keyword level data in organic search traffic, and the introduction of not provided, which is kind of standard today. And there are probably folks who've entered the industry and maybe even on this call who don't remember that we ever used to have keyword level data in our analytics, and we could actually track not only the search that folks did, but what they did on the website following that individual search. And there was a big outcry and consternation when Google said that they were doing that for privacy reasons. And there is something fair about the fact that there was a good deal of hypocrisy buried in this when they're still providing keyword level data to their advertisers. But I think they were also forward thinking and ahead of the game on realizing that this privacy question was going to be a big deal, both for users, but I think more importantly for regulators, and that they were going to be forced not to track, record, and share some of that kind of data. So what we're doing is a combination of Search Console, click data, and as I say, kind of log level, anonymized, not even storing IP address type tracking that just literally counts page views and doesn't attribute them to any individual, any human. And there's various, I'm not going to get deep into the tactical weeds, but there are various things that can be done around those angles that can help run more sensitive SEO tests compared to just using data that is filtered for both folks who have opted out of cookie consent tracking and folks who've effectively opted out by using an ad blocker as well. Actually, that first point about the cookie consent is a really important one. I have mentioned this before, but it's easy to naively make changes to your analytics tracking that have very different impacts than you might expect. Cookies are always a funny one, and this absolutely should have been handled at the browser level rather than at the cookie consent dialog level by every single website that you visit, not least because it isn't saved well, and repeat visitors, you still get that little pop-up, and also that it doesn't protect you from bad actors, so it's all entirely relying on the website doing what it says it will do when you press do not accept cookies. But if you have that hooked up to your GA, or most analytics platforms operate in quite a similar way, if you turn on that consent mode and somebody says they don't consent to cookies and you set the GA4 consent mode, you're actually not just saying don't set a cookie, you're actually saying don't track this user at all. Now, it's not exactly that. Google does use that data. That data still gets sent to Google, and they are no doubt using it for their modeling purposes and inclusion in the kind of modeled outputs of their reports, but it's not showing up in the regular reports. And that is counterintuitive. That's not what I think many folks think is happening when you reject cookies. You think maybe you're just not getting tracked. You're not getting tracked over time. If you make another visit to this website, it would look like a new session, those kinds of things. That's how folks might assume it's being handled, whereas in fact, it just goes completely dark. So if folks are either rejecting or just not accepting that cookie dialog, depending on how it's connected up and how it's hooked up, and you obviously need legal advice on the correct way of doing these things. I'm not a lawyer or a GDPR expert, but with a lot of folks' implementations of this, what that means is unless you proactively click the accept button, that user is not showing up at all in analytics data. And as I say, I think that's contrary to many folks' expectations. So I'm not going to go through this whole post today. It's far too much of it, but it is insightful and well thought through, and I would recommend folks take a look at it as well. While we're talking about articles and resources, we've got this new resources section on the SearchPilot website, and it allows you to filter to all different kinds of content that we've been producing. So more in-depth PDFs, our articles are all resources. You can watch some videos which include webinar replays, and in fact replays of this kind of thing as well, and our presentations, whether they be webinars or at conferences. And so I'm hopeful this is going to turn out to be useful to folks, and that you will enjoy consuming our content in this kind of way. We have these featured kinds of content. We also have the search box, and not only that, but you can filter down and just see the bits of content that you really want to see by content type and by theme, by industry, and where appropriate by, for example, test type. And so you can drill down into those different kind of outcomes. To wrap up, a few other bits and pieces. I talked, I think it was last week on the live stream, about how our testing isn't all about titles, and I really want to emphasize that. We're doing testing on content, we're doing testing on links, we're doing testing on basically any kind of attribute of on-page SEO that can happen across a large number of pages. So we typically aren't testing things like robots.txt, but we are testing essentially anything that happens on the page. And then, of course, I didn't coordinate very well, and the test result that the team put out just after my live stream last week was one about titles, which is a good time to emphasize that it is often not about titles, but sometimes it is. And title tag tests have actually been some of our most impactful and most effective tests. I've talked about this many times because it is both a ranking factor that affects how and what you rank for, how well you rank, but also it's a click-through rate factor that affects how attractive your search result, your snippet looks in that search result. Very tactical thing as well. I've had a few questions like this one from David on this one's on Twitter, but just asking about, we were talking last week about click-through rate, zero-click searches, and whether these things are growing or declining over time. And there's definitely some misconceptions that David's talking here about whether we need to decrease our expected click-through rate to take account of the fact that of zero clicks and so forth. And I think the main thing to realize is most of those tools, most of those data sources should already have that factored in. So the zero-click searches are already in the other X% of not in the click-through rate. One of the things that makes that confounding when you look at it is that the numbers can add up to more than 100%. And I called that out in this discussion somewhere down here. I've lost the actual reply now. But the point being, it is possible to have multiple clicks on a given search result. So you do one search and you do multiple clicks on that search, whether it's opening them in new tabs or just simply searching, clicking repeatedly. And so the click-through rates are not expected to add up to 100%. They ought to add up to, or they can add up to more than the total of all searches. And it can be muddied, therefore, by to figure out how many zero-click searches there are. And that's why we need data like the clickstream data that Randa's been sharing and SparkToro have been sharing that I talked about last week. And I think that's pretty much us done. If you've enjoyed this content, it's regularly going out this kind of time on a Tuesday, and you can head to searchpilot.com/live to get more resources. You can follow me. I'm at Will Critchlow on Twitter and LinkedIn, or the SearchPilot YouTube channel, which is at SearchPilot on YouTube, where if you sign up to the notifications in different places, you can get told when future live streams are happening, and you can watch it in any of those places. So I live stream to my Twitter, my LinkedIn, and the SearchPilot YouTube account. If you have any questions, just hit me up on any of those platforms publicly if possible, but my DMs are open if you need to. And I'm just going to leave you with the final thought that has been bouncing around my head since I heard the quote on a podcast the other week, which was, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And this has been useful to me recently, realizing that I can lean more into some of the things that I do without compromising my work, my professional life, these other things. And it reminded me very much of things I've heard from coaches, sports coaches in the past, talking about that you play like you train. And if you don't put the effort in training and you amble around not taking it seriously, you have no right to expect that you're going to be able to step it up at game time. And we're possibly getting into self-help therapy here, but it's been helpful to me recently, so I thought I would share it. On that note, I hope you go and attack the problems in front of you and have a wonderful week. And remember, how you do one thing is how you do everything. I've been Will Critchlow. Chat to you again next week. Take care.